We have gotten so many questions about this next story. A lot of you had a lot to say and a lot to ask about the Nicholas Kristof ruling. But first, a quick update on that story. Actually, as expected, Kristof today formally requested the Oregon Supreme Court review the Secretary of State's decision to disqualify him from the governor's race. The secretary announced yesterday Kristof is ineligible to run. The reason? For the last 3 years, she said, Kristof has not been living as a resident of Oregon as required by the state's constitution. She said Kristof hasn't voted here. He hasn't even proven he paid income taxes here. In short, she said the longtime New York Times columnist has clearly been living as a New Yorker.
In the end, our elections officials told me it wasn't even a close call.
Well, my willingness to challenge the status quo is the reason state officials are trying to toss me from the ballot.
Kristof was born in Oregon and owns property in Yamhill County. In his filing today, his campaign argued Kristof satisfies Oregon's residency requirement because he lives in Oregon and has viewed and treated Oregon as his home for decades. They're obviously hoping the state Supreme Court agrees and makes a decision quickly because the state has to start printing ballots for the primary in March. But meantime, let's drill down a little bit on this because our viewer Rod nailed a core issue in this case by asking, concerning the Kristof situation, what is the legal definition of resident? Rod, awesome question. Again, that is the core issue. In short, there is no legal definition of resident, at least not in this context. There's no case law defining it, and the Oregon Constitution doesn't define it either. In fact, here's the passage from the Oregon Constitution that details the requirements to run for governor. And the original phrasing obviously makes it a little bit confusing. It's kind of old-timey, but it says, think of it like this: no one can run for governor except those who are U.S. citizens, at least 30 years old, and a resident within this state for 3 years preceding their election. But that's it. That's all it says. That's all the passage details about that point. It doesn't go into anything about what it means to be a resident in Oregon. And that's why the Secretary of State specifically explained the decision was based off of things like where Kristof voted, where he paid taxes, even where he has his driver's license, New York, by the way. And it's also why this case could be historic. The Oregon Supreme Court could, if they decide to hear this case, give a more precise definition for officials to use moving forward. But in the meantime, we want to point you toward a piece we think is worth your time, especially if you need a laugh. Portland Monthly's managing editor Margaret Seiler penned a chef's kiss-worthy satire titled, "What is Residency, Really?" She poked fun at how subjective the requirement clearly is and made a case for her eligibility to be considered a resident in all 50 states, one by one. Among her greatest hits, she says she was in Florida on spring break when Kurt Cobain died. So that covers Florida. She's a resident in Florida. She has a friend who, quote, looked so much like her growing up, they were often asked if they were twins. This friend now lives in Colorado. Or does she? She could easily be Seiler, who lives in Colorado. Checkbox for Colorado. The list goes on. And the piece ends with our quote of the day. Buckle up for this one. Quote, "Legal doctrine can sometimes deceive, inveigle, obfuscate. Even in a legal memorandum, it can be important to look down at the situation as if from the UFO on the poster in Fox Mulder's office and simply want to believe, to look past the Doug firs and to the enchanted forest, which Seiler finally went to last summer after 20 years in Oregon, and which is officially amazing." Margaret Seiler, she continues, is a resident of, insert state name here. That is obvious. Boom. Again, that is satire, but I gotta say, from one Margaret to another, my God, bravo, well done, well done. All right, next viewer question. DJ asked, when you discuss his candidacy, could you report if he, meaning Kristof, has filed Oregon state income taxes the last 3 years? DJ, fantastic question. So as we said, Kristof argues that he paid income taxes in Oregon in 2019 and 2020, but he didn't provide proof. Yesterday, reporters asked why.
Well, we didn't provide the documents to the Secretary of State because she did not ask for them. If she had asked for that or for anything else, we would have been happy to provide it.
Okay, there you go. Then there came the follow-up question.
why not provide it to the press?
We will indeed provide our tax returns along with other candidates later, as is traditional. We wanted to honor the Secretary of State's inquiry while this was in the works. And we are disappointed that it did not go differently.
Okay. DJ, that is Kristof's answer as far as his taxes go. Do with that what you will.